One of my jobs as a pastor is to prepare people to suffer. Suffering is a universal experience. It's one of the few things that all people have in common. And one of my jobs as a pastor is to preach and to pray in such a way that prepares people to suffer and helps people to suffer well when suffering inevitably comes their way. There's a universality to human pain and suffering. I want to lead us into a season of considering the book of Job, and as we consider the book of Job, we consider the story of one man that God loved and he allowed to suffer so much. We all suffer. We do well to consider why. It's because when we sinned against a holy God and when we received that dust to dust and ashes to ashes verdict, suffering became an inevitable part of our lives. But it doesn't have to stay there. But it is part of our lives until we come to that time when Jesus does come back to make everything new for those who are trusting in Jesus Christ. Welcome to the Redeemer community. Welcome to another Bible Talk. We're beginning a collection of talks in the book of Job for the next 7 weeks considering God, pain, and human suffering. And I realize I'm not talking into some empty vacuum or void, but I'm talking to you, a real person dealing with real pain and real experiences. When we talk about human pain and suffering, I don't know the depths of the pain and suffering that you have experienced, and you don't know the depths of mine. We're not here to compare who's had the worst go of it of all. We're here to look at God and consider the God who is there and allows people to suffer. Think of the different kinds of suffering that there are. There's spiritual suffering. Everyone suffers the sorrow of absence of the presence of Jesus. There's physical suffering. Physical pain is real. Whether a little girl stubs her toe or an old man is aching with old joints and everything in between, we know what it is to suffer physically. There's also relational suffering. Who has not been cheated? Who has not been lied to? Who has not been insulted? Who has not been rejected? Relational suffering may actually be the most elusive type of suffering of them all because relational pain is our risk when we choose to relate to other people. Let's go right into the book of Job and let's see what kind of suffering that he was on for. Job chapter 1 verses 1 through 3, diving right in. First thing we see is this. Job worshiped God and God blessed Job. Look at it in the first 3 verses. Verse 1 introduces Job and his character. We see this man Job is a good man. His reputation was blameless. His reverence for God governed everything that he did, and Job worshiped God. You see there in verses 2 through 3, look how God awarded this righteous man. This righteous man had 7 sons, 3 daughters, flocks on flocks on flocks. He had servants. He was the greatest of all people. God made Job rich. Now, here in the Redeemer community, we do not believe in the prosperity gospel. The prosperity gospel says that if you love God, then God will award you by making you rich and giving you stuff. But here in Job chapter 1, we must honestly recognize that God did make Job rich. But as we're about to see, God took those very things away that he initially entrusted to Job's care. Look at verses 4 through 5. This man loved his family and loved God. Verses 4 and 5 is a snapshot illustrating his love for God and family. Job would always get up early in the morning and sacrifice for his family. There's a good anxiety to him. Maybe someone in his house did something wrong. He doesn't want to be like Eli, who has these evil sons. He wants to care for his children and intercede for his children. He loves God. He loves his children. So Job is a man who loves God and loves his family. And scroll down to verses 13 to 19. God allowed Satan to take away Job's family and possessions. Verse 13 is when calamity came. Calamity will come for each and every one of us. We will all experience pain. We will all experience sorrow. We will all experience suffering. Look at how it came to this one man who had so much. It seems that trouble is coming to this man from God in all directions. Verses 13 to 15. He gets news that the enemies have attacked. Job's children were enjoying the fruit of his wealth. Enemies came from the south and killed his animals and children with swords. Job's possessions were attacked. And while he was talking, fire or lightning fell from heaven, and the sheep and the servants were destroyed. And while he was talking, in verse 17, another attack. The Chaldeans, Job's enemies to the north, had a strategy of forming into 3 groups and killing all of Job's camels and servants in that group. And in verses 18 and 19, the final report comes from his servants. Where are Job's children enjoying his wealth in one of their homes? And in verse 13, we see, so far as we have seen, his possessions and his servants have been taken away. We see the final servant reports. A tornado has come and struck the house. All of Job's children have been killed and collapsed in the house with them. All of his prosperity is gone. Now, what is happening? Well, to see what's going on in Job's situation, you cannot look into this world. You must look to heaven. When we get to this point in the story, we wonder, what in the world is going on? How in the world is this man of God allowed to endure so much pain? Now, the point that Job makes for each of us to consider is this: when suffering comes, we should look to heaven. And it's right there in verses 6 through 12. God allowed Satan to test Job. To understand what's going on, we need to go to heaven. The author transports us to heaven, and you see in verse 7, there's a gathering of the sons of God. The heavenly beings are being gathered before the throne of God, a pretty common theme throughout the Old Testament. And the Satan is there too. Satan means adversary or enemy. And Satan had been prowling around on the earth like a lion looking for souls to devour. Look at verse 8. It is God who brings Job up for conversation. Don't miss it. A meeting between God and Satan, and God puts his trophy on display for his enemy to consider. Have you considered my servant Job, is what comes out of the mouth of God. It's as though a thief meets the owner of a jewelry store, and the jewelry store says, hey, I actually have this one prized possession. I keep it right over here in the back. Let me go draw that out for you. You know what's going on here? Well, I doubt the possibility that God is stupid. I doubt that God doesn't know what he's doing. No, the plain fact of the matter is that mysteriously, God offers Job up. Verses 9 and 10. Satan says, well, does Job fear God for nothing? This is a crucial question for us because it's a personal one. It's as if Satan believes the only reason that Job worships God is because God has given him a great family and great possessions. And hear the accusation of Satan to God. The only reason he fears you is because you shower him with good things. Let's take away those things and he won't love you anymore. Oh, is the same being said of us in our own lives? Only heaven knows. Verse 11. Touch all that he has and he will curse you. And God could have said, I don't need to prove anything to you, but he doesn't do that on this day. God chooses to get an open victory over Satan. The victory is about proving that God is of paramount value and that people will worship him, whether they have tons of possessions and family or not. What happens next is a heavenly contest between God and Satan over what is most valuable: possessions from God or the presence of God. This is what it's all about. And in verse 12, God says all that he has is in your hands. And what happens next is what we've already seen. Job loses all of his wealth, and Job loses all of his family save his wife. Now this is incredible. It is incredible, and it's of heavenly importance. The contest between God and Satan is over the worth and the value of God. How does Job respond? Does Job respond to God when his family and possessions are taken away from him? What does he do? Behold, verses 20 and 22. Job worships God. Verse 21 and 22. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job did not curse God when his wealth and family were taken away, because the superior worth of God was manifested for all to see. Job did tear his clothes. He did shave his head. These were common expressions of grief. And he expressed his real grief when he encountered trouble that had come his way. He fell to the ground and he worshiped. Being face down on the ground before God was an outward way of saying that you trust God. So when Job suffered, Job worshiped. Was he the grin it and bear it type of guy? Was this a let's just pack it away and not talk about it, let's just sweep it under the rug? No, he's real and he's honest before God. Satan believed that Job would curse God in verses 9 through 11, and Job did just the opposite in verses 20 to 22. He worshiped God. We're beginning a journey deep into the heart of God. We'll explore the worth and value of God. And let me show you just 4 truths, just briefly, about how God is at work in our own human suffering. Notice this: God is in control when life is good. God loves Job and is in perfect control in verses 1 through 5. But also see this: God is in control of your enemy as well in verses 6 through 12. God loves Job and in his perfect control of his world in verses 6 through 12. Satan is your enemy who wants to destroy you. Sometimes that enemy is expressed through another person, but make no mistake about it, we have an enemy named the Satan. Job reminds us that we have a common enemy who wants to torture and to kill. And this is a good reminder. We don't need to be enemies with one another. We have a common enemy in him. Number 3, God is in control when life is hard. God loves Job and is in perfect control of his world in verses 13 to 19. A heavenly contest is taking place between God and the Satan. And the contest is not to show which side is greater. This contest is to show that God will be worshiped for who he is and not for what he gives. God is in control and we can trust him in all situations. So notice the book of Job then endeavors to do something different. The book of Job doesn't endeavor to tell us how suffering exists. It doesn't even go on to tell us why suffering exists. Instead, this book exists to tell us who we can go to when we come into the midst of suffering. And fourth, notice this theme that God is in control. God is in control. This will help us worship God in all situations. God loves Job, and God is in perfect control of his world in verses 20 to 22 as well. Worshiping God is not for the Stoics. One of the things I love about Job is his raw emotions, how he's real about where he is in his worship of God. Job gets up early and he makes sacrifices. And then at the end of the chapter, he shaves his head and he mourns when things are hard. Some people don't use emotion and we wonder if they're actually worshiping God. But God can handle our emotions. God can handle our laments. He can handle our genuine worship. Friends are going to come along and they're going to share with Job. They represent a theological straitjacket that doesn't allow room for the unthinkable. Job's struggle is to break through the straitjacket thinking of his friends into a restored relationship with God. So where are we going in the days ahead? Here's where we're going. We're going into the book of Job and we're going on a journey deep into the heart of God. And very practically for us today, as suffering inevitably comes our way, three ways to go. First, look to heaven. In all the situations you face, look to heaven. Look to the place where God is. Look specifically to Jesus. Fix your eyes on Jesus. A difficulty of suffering is that we live on our own when life is good and we run to God when life is hard. Look to heaven. Second, love the giver and not the gifts. The contest here is, will God be worshiped for the possessions that he provides or the presence that he has? Satan thought that he might get Job by taking away the gifts and possessions and the family that God had given to him. Let's set ourselves to love the giver and not the gifts. And third and finally, let's live with honesty in all the situations we face. Redeemer, one of the prayers I'm praying for you as we enter this collection of talks is that God would make us more humble and more honest people, more connected to our real emotions and able to express them. We don't have to look like we have it all together. The Christian life is about being honest before God and one another. And as we enter into this book of Job, let's remember the gospel. Because the good news is that Jesus will triumph over every pain and every suffering. The gospel is news of God's rescue from pain and suffering. And how God does it is he rescues us through pain and suffering. As we read the pages of the Bible, we see that when we're in pain, we don't need a formula for how this is happening or why this is happening. We need a formula for who. So let's fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who endured much suffering for us.